Hey there! Tonight we're venturing into the fading embers of a dying world, a place where ash falls like snow, and the very concept of time has begun to collapse in on itself. We're going to explore the complete story of Dark Souls 3, from the age before memory to the final confrontation at the literal end of the world. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop a comment and let me know what corner of the world you're settling into. There's something comforting about knowing others are out there, drifting off to these tales of dying flames and forgotten gods. Now, get comfortable, pull your blankets close, let everything else fade away. Because the story of Dark Souls 3 is the story of an ending, of a world that has burned itself out over countless millennia, of heroes who became kindling, and of a cycle that refuses to break no matter how many times it turns. This is a tale about fire and darkness, about gods who fell from grace and humans who refused to stay dead. This is about the desperate final gasps of an age that should have ended long ago, kept alive through sacrifice after sacrifice, each one buying just a little more time for a world that's forgotten why it even wants to survive. To understand Dark Souls 3, we must first travel back to a time before time itself had meaning. Back to the Age of Ancients, when the world was nothing but grey stone, arching trees that stretched into perpetual fog, and dragons. Everlasting dragons, immortal beings covered in stone scales, who ruled over a colourless, unchanging world where nothing truly lived or died. The world was shrouded in fog, formless and empty. There was no heat or cold, no life or death, no light or dark, just an eternal twilight where the everlasting dragons sat perched on the great arch trees, watching over a world that never changed because change itself had not yet been invented. Then came fire. The first flame appeared, and with it came disparity, heat and cold, life and death, and most importantly light and dark. The flame brought change to a changeless world, and from the darkness around that flame, humanoid creatures emerged. They were called hollows, empty things drawn to the warmth of the first flame. Among these hollows, 4 discovered something extraordinary within the flame. They found Lord Souls, fragments of incredible power that transformed them from empty vessels into beings of terrible might. Gravelord Nito, the first of the dead, claimed a soul that gave him dominion over death itself. The Witch of Izalith found the soul of life, becoming mother to the flame sorcerers and eventually the daughters of chaos. Gwyn, who would become the Lord of Sunlight, seized a soul of incredible brilliance that granted him the power of lightning. And then there was the 4th soul, the Dark Soul, found by the furtive pygmy, a being so easily forgotten that even the grand tales of the Age of Fire rarely mention them. This Dark Soul was different from the others, where the other Lord Souls granted immediate, obvious power. The Dark Soul was patient. The pygmy split it apart, distributing fragments of it to create humanity itself. Each human carries a tiny piece of that original Dark Soul, a fragment of darkness that grows stronger as the flames grow weaker. With their newfound power, these lords waged war against the everlasting dragons. Gwyn wielded bolts of lightning that could shear the stone scales from dragonhide. The Witch of Izalith conjured great firestorms. Nito unleashed the concept of death itself upon creatures that had never known mortality. And there was Seath, a dragon born without scales, an outcast among his own kind, who betrayed the dragons to the lords and taught them how to kill his immortal kin. The war was long and brutal, but the lords were victorious. The Age of Ancients ended in fire and lightning, and from its ashes rose the Age of Fire, the Golden Age of the Gods. Chapter 1. The Age of Fire and Gwyn's Sin. The Age of Fire was glorious beyond measure. Gwyn established his seat of power in Anor Londo, a gleaming city of white stone bathed in eternal sunlight. He had 3 children who would play crucial roles in the ages to come. His firstborn son, a god of war whose name would later be struck from history. Guinevere, the Princess of Sunlight, radiant and beloved. And Gwyndolin, raised as a daughter despite being born a son, who possessed an affinity for the moon rather than his father's sunlight. Gwyn commanded 4 knights of legendary prowess. Dragonslayer Ornstein, who had served under Gwyn's firstborn during the war. Hawkeye Gorf, a giant archer of unparalleled skill. Lord's Blade Siren, swift and deadly. And Artorius of the Abyss, perhaps the greatest of them all, who walked alongside a great wolf companion named Sif. For Saith's betrayal of his own kind, Gwyn rewarded the scaleless dragon with the title of Duke, giving him a fragment of his own Lord's soul and granting him the archives in which to conduct his research into the nature of immortality. Seath would eventually go mad in his pursuit, his experiments creating abominations and his jealousy of the scaled dragons festering into obsession. The lords also granted fragments of their power to those who served them well. The 4 kings of New Londo received a piece of Gwyn's Lord Soul in recognition of their foresight in building a great underground civilization. This gift would later prove to be their downfall, as the Dark Wraiths and the Abyss would consume New Londo entirely. But all was not well in this golden age. The first flame, source of all this power and prosperity, began to fade. This was inevitable, as all flames must eventually die. But as the flame weakened, the power of the gods weakened with it. Gwyn's lightning grew dim. The sun over Anor Londo began to pale. The Lord's souls themselves started to sputter like candles in a draught. And as the light faded, something else grew stronger. Humanity. The children of the Dark Soul found that they flourished in the waning light. The darkness within them, that fragment of the furtive pygmy's discovery, grew more potent with each passing year. It became clear that if the flame were allowed to die completely, an age of dark would begin, and humanity would inherit the world from the gods. Gwyn could not allow this, whether from fear of losing his power, from genuine belief that the world needed the flame to survive, or from simple unwillingness to surrender what he had built. The Lord of Sunlight made a choice that would echo through the ages. He would link the first flame, sacrificing himself to keep it burning. He split his Lord Soul, giving pieces to his most trusted servants and to Seath. Then, taking what remained of his power, Gwyn walked into the kiln of the first flame. There he offered himself as kindling, his soul burned, and the first flame roared back to life brighter than ever. The Age of Fire was saved, but this salvation came at a terrible cost. Gwyn's sacrifice created something new in the world, a curse. The Darksign appeared, marking certain humans as undead. These cursed individuals could not truly die. When killed, they would resurrect at bonfires, fragments of the first flame scattered throughout the world. But each death took something from them, wearing away at their mind and memories until they became hollow, empty husks driven only by base instinct. The undead curse spread like a plague. No one understood why some were afflicted and others weren't. The marked individuals were gathered up and sent to remote places, locked away in asylums and left to go mad in isolation. The gods feared these undead, perhaps recognizing them as symptoms of the flame's unnatural prolonging, perhaps simply finding them disturbing reminders of their own fading power. But Gwyn's linking of the flame established more than just a curse. It created a precedent, a template for how the Age of Fire could be preserved. When the flame began to fade again, another champion could step forward and link it anew, burning their soul to buy another Age of Firelight. It didn't matter if that champion understood what they were doing or consented to their fate. The flame needed fuel, and souls would burn whether they were offered willingly or not. This was Gwyn's first sin, the crime that would reshape the entire world. He had taken the natural cycle of flame and dark, of death and rebirth, and perverted it into an endless loop. The Age of Fire would not die as it should have. Instead, it would stumble on, growing weaker with each iteration, each linking buying less time than the last, each sacrifice burning faster than the one before. The world became trapped in a cycle. The flame would fade. A champion would emerge, guided by prophecy or by those who serve the gods, and that champion would link the fire. The Age of Fire would continue. Kingdoms would rise and flourish in the light. Then the flame would begin to fade again. Those kingdoms would crumble and the process would repeat. Years became centuries. Centuries became millennia. The land itself began to shift and change. Kingdoms built on the ruins of kingdoms. History forgotten and remembered and forgotten again. The gods of Anor Londo, immortal but not immune to time's effects, began to fade along with their power. Guinevere left, presumably with her husband the flame god Flann. Gwyn was dead, burned to ash in the kiln. Only Gwyndolin remained, maintaining an illusion of his sister's presence to give humanity hope, continuing his father's mission of perpetuating the Age of Fire. And somewhere, in the forgotten corners of the world, a question began to form. A question that would haunt every age to come. Was this cycle worth preserving? Had Gwyn's sacrifice truly saved the world, or had it merely postponed an inevitable ending while condemning countless souls to burn in his place? Chapter 2. The Endless Cycle. Between the original Dark Souls and Dark Souls 3, uncountable ages passed. The world changed beyond recognition. The chosen undead of the first game either linked the fire or walked away into darkness, but regardless of their choice, the cycle continued. Whether through their sacrifice or someone else's, the first flame found fuel and burned on. Dark Souls 2 showed us one kingdom in this long chain of civilizations. Drangleic, built by King Vendrick, who sought to break the curse of the undead and end the cycle itself. He failed, as all such attempts failed. Vendrick went hollow, wandering the crypts of his own kingdom, his crown empty and his mission unfulfilled. The bearer of the curse faced choices of their own, but whatever path they chose, the world continued its slow, grinding loop. Through all these ages, certain patterns emerged. Each time the flame began to fade, those who wished to preserve the Age of Fire would ring great bells, summoning champions to link the fire. Sometimes these champions succeeded, becoming Lords of Cinder, their bodies burned to ash but their souls strong enough to fuel the flame for another age. Sometimes they failed, becoming unkindled, ash without even the strength to become cinder, considered unworthy failures, but each linking bought less time than the last. The flame grew harder to kindle, requiring stronger souls, more powerful sacrifices. The curse of the undead spread further with each age, affecting more people, driving more victims to hollowing. The world became littered with the ruins of previous ages, civilizations built on civilizations, until it was impossible to remember which came first or how many had risen and fallen. The land itself began to converge. This was one of the strangest phenomena of the Dying Age. The Kingdom of Lothric, the setting of Dark Souls 3, became a place where the transitory lands of the Lords of Cinder converge. Time and space were breaking down. Different eras were collapsing into each other. You could walk from ruins thousands of years old into a castle from a more recent age, all existing in the same physical space despite being separated by eons of history. The gods continued to fade. Gwyn had burned himself away long ago. Most of his knights were dead or had abandoned their posts. Ornstein, the loyal dragon slayer, eventually left Anor Londo in search of the nameless king, Gwyn's disgraced firstborn. The city of the gods became a ghost town, its grand halls empty except for Gwyndolin's illusions and the few faithful who remained. But through all this decline and decay, through all these failed kingdoms and forgotten ages, the Age of Fire stubbornly persisted. Each time it should have ended, someone stepped forward to link it anew. Sometimes they were heroes genuinely trying to save the world. Sometimes they were manipulated into it, led by prophecies or by those who served the flame. Sometimes they were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, drafted into service whether they wanted it or not. The cycle created its own kind of theology. The Way of White was established, a religious order dedicated to keeping the flame alive. They taught that the Age of Fire was sacred, that the linking of the flame was a noble sacrifice, that the alternative, an Age of Dark, would bring only suffering and chaos. They sent missionaries across the land, spread their teachings, guided undead toward their destinies as kindling. But there were always those who questioned. The Dark Wraiths, servants of Darkstalker Caothi, believed the Age of Dark was humanity's birthright, stolen by Gwyn's fear and pride. They sought to hasten the flame's end, to bring about the age that should have come millennia ago. The Sable Church of Lundor took this further, seeking not just to let the flame die, but to usurp it, to take its power for humanity's own use. Meanwhile, the undead themselves became a permanent fixture of the world. No longer were they simply gathered and locked away. Instead, they were recognized as potential kindling, potential Lords of Cinder. The undead settlements sprang up, way stations on the path to the kiln of the first flame. Firelink Shrine became a recurring landmark across the ages, always serving the same purpose, a place where undead gathered before their final journey. Through all these ages, certain powerful beings managed to persist. Some, like Ludleth of Corland, linked the flame and became Lords of Cinder, only to be raised from their graves when the flame needed them again. Others, like Aldrich of the Deep, earned the title through sheer might despite having never intended to serve the flame. Some, like Yhorm the Giant, link the flame for specific reasons and were horrified to be awakened to do it again. And so the ages turned. Fire and ash, light and dark, over and over until the very concept of history became meaningless. How many kingdoms had risen? How many had fallen? How many times had the flame been linked? No one remembered anymore. The cycle had become reality itself, a perpetual machine grinding forward, converting souls into flame, flame into time, time into ash. Until, at last, we arrive at the final age, the Age of Lothric, where the cycle finally begins to break, where a prince born and raised to be the perfect kindling simply refuses to burn, where the old Lords of Cinder, summoned from their graves to link the flame again, abandon their thrones and walk away, where the flame gutters so low that it can barely resurrect even the unkindled, those failed heroes of past ages who weren't strong enough to become Lords of Cinder. This is where Dark Souls 3 begins. At the end of the world, when the cycle can no longer sustain itself, when even those who built it begin to realise that perhaps it's time to let it die. Chapter 3: The Kingdom of Lothric and the Unkindled. The Kingdom of Lothric was built with a singular purpose. The royal bloodline was carefully cultivated, scholars studied the nature of the flame and soul, and the entire civilization was oriented toward producing the perfect vessel to link the first flame. This wasn't a kingdom that happened to have a connection to the flame's linking. This was a kingdom that existed solely to create the ultimate sacrifice. Prince Lothric was the culmination of generations of this breeding and preparation. He was called the last hope of his line, the final product of centuries of bloodline refinement. Born frail and weak of body but blessed with tremendous magical power, Lothric was raised from birth knowing his destiny. He would become a Lord of Cinder. He would link the flame. He would save the world. But Lothric had a secret. His older brother Lorien had once been the kingdom's greatest champion. Lorien had slain the demon prince, a feat that left his greatsword forever wreathed in flame. But that victory had come at a cost. The demon's curse had crippled Lorien, leaving him unable to walk. In an act of brotherly love so profound it defied the very purpose of the kingdom, Lorien chose to share his younger brother's curse, taking on Lothric's frailty so that Lothric wouldn't have to bear it alone. The two princes became inseparable. Lorien carried Lothric on his back, and Lothric guided his brother with magic and strategy. They were two halves of a whole, each completing the other, and together they made a decision that would doom the entire kingdom. They refused. When the time came for Lothric to link the first flame, when all his preparation and training reached its culmination, the prince simply said no. He chose to watch the flame die from afar, to let the Age of Fire end as it should have ended long ago. His teachers, his scholars, perhaps even Pontiff Sulyvahn himself, had convinced him that linking the flame was not salvation but perpetuation of a dying world. Better to let it end than to sacrifice himself for a few more years of borrowed time. This refusal triggered a crisis unlike any the world had seen. In desperation, the bells tolled. These were the same bells that had rung across the ages, calling champions to link the fire. But this time, they did something different. They didn't call new heroes. Instead, they summoned the old ones, raising Lords of Cinder from their graves, forcing those who had already burned themselves once to return and burn themselves again. 4 Lords of Cinder rose from death. Ludleth of Corlen the Exiled, who'd been the smallest and seemingly weakest Lord of Cinder, yet had successfully linked the flame in his age. Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, who'd been forced to link the flame not through heroism, but through his terrible strength, despite his cannibalistic nature. The Abyss Watchers, an entire legion of warriors who shared a single soul there, collective might enough to kindle the flame together, and Yhorm the Giant, who had linked the flame to save his people, only to find that his sacrifice had meant nothing. But something unprecedented happened. These Lords of Cinder, raised from their rest to fulfill their duty once again, looked at the dying flame and walked away. They abandoned their thrones. They refused to link the fire again. It wasn't enough that Lothric had rejected his destiny. Now even the proven champions, those who had already sacrificed themselves once, were unwilling to do it again. The world faced collapse. Without Lords of Cinder on their thrones, without a new champion to link the flame, the first flame would die for good. The Age of Fire would end. Whatever came next, whether the Age of Dark or something entirely new, it would arrive not through choice but through the complete failure of the cycle itself. And so, in a final desperate measure, the bells tolled one more time, but they didn't summon Lords of Cinder this time. They reached deeper into the graves of those who had failed, those who had tried to link the flame but weren't strong enough. They summoned the Unkindled. The Unkindled are a peculiar sort of undead. They are the remains of those who attempted to link the first flame but burned to ash without becoming Lords of Cinder. Their failures, rejects, ash without the strength to even become proper kindling. In past ages, they would simply stay dead, forgotten remnants of unsuccessful champions. But the flame was desperate, and so the Unkindled rose. Nameless, accursed undead, unfit even to be cinder, they dragged themselves from their graves and stumbled toward duty. These were not heroes of legend. These were the ones who failed, now given a second chance not through merit, but through sheer necessity. The player character, the Ashen One, is one such Unkindled. They awaken in the cemetery of Ash, the same cemetery where they failed and died in some previous age. The world has changed beyond recognition since their first attempt. They don't remember much of their original life, their original failure. They only know that the bells are tolling, the flame is dying, and they have been given another chance to succeed where they once failed. Their task is clear, if seemingly impossible. The Lords of Cinder have abandoned their thrones. The Ashen One must hunt them down, slay them, and forcibly return their cinders to their proper places. Only when all the thrones at Firelink Shrine are filled can the path to the kiln of the first flame be opened. Only then can the Ashen One attempt what they failed to do before, link the fire and continue the Age of Fire for one more cycle. But this raises questions that the Ashen One must answer for themselves. Is this cycle worth preserving? The world is a ruin. The kingdoms have fallen. The gods are dead or fled. The flame itself seems barely able to sustain the few people who remain. Everyone who understood the cycle, everyone who was supposed to uphold it, has refused or abandoned their duty. Is forcing this dying age to continue truly the right thing to do? Or is it time at last to let it end? These questions haunt every step of the journey through Lothric. They echo in the empty halls of fallen kingdoms, in the last words of dying champions, in the eyes of those who still believe the Age of Fire can be saved. And they will not be answered until the very end, when the Ashen One stands before the first flame itself and must make a choice that will determine the fate of the entire world. Chapter 4: The Lords of Cinder, Their Stories. To understand the crisis facing Lothric, we must understand the Lords of Cinder who refused their duty. Each of them has a story, a reason they linked the flame the first time, and a reason they refused to do it again. Let's begin with Ludleth of Courland, the only Lord of Cinder who actually sits upon his throne at Firelink Shrine. Ludleth is a mystery wrapped in contradictions. He's a pygmy, one of the descendants of the furtive pygmy who first found the Dark Soul. The Dark Soul should make him naturally aligned with darkness, with humanity's eventual inheritance of the world. Yet Ludleth linked the flame, becoming a Lord of Cinder. He sits upon his throne without being forced there, without the Ashen One needing to hunt him down. His legs have been cut off, whether as punishment, as sacrifice, or to prevent him from walking away like the others. He speaks cryptically of transposing souls, a skill he teaches the Ashen One, allowing them to forge weapons and miracles from the souls of bosses. This suggests Ludleth understands the fundamental nature of souls in a way few others do. Ludleth speaks often of his fear. He's terrified of the dark, of hollowing, of what would happen if the flame died. Unlike the other lords, he seems to believe wholeheartedly that the Age of Fire must continue, that the alternative is too terrible to contemplate. He begs the Ashen One to complete their mission, to light the flame, to keep the darkness at bay. Whether his fear is justified, or if he's simply been manipulated into believing the flame's propaganda, is unclear. But his conviction is genuine, as is his willingness to sacrifice everything, including his own mobility, to ensure the fire continues burning. Next, we have the Abyss Watchers, one of the most tragic tales in all of Dark Souls. They were an entire legion of warriors, bound together by the blood of the wolf. Each Abyss Watcher drank from the same source, linking their souls together so completely that they became one entity spread across many bodies. Their purpose was noble, to hunt the abyss wherever it appeared, to prevent another catastrophe like Ulasile. The Abyss Watchers modelled themselves after Artorius, Gwyn's greatest knight, who had fallen to the abyss trying to save the kingdom of Unkindled centuries ago. They took up his mission, wandering the world seeking any trace of the dark corruption that Artorius had died fighting. When they found the abyss, they destroyed it without mercy, even if it meant burning entire kingdoms to ash. Their headquarters was Farron Keep, a poisonous swamp that had once been something greater. There they maintained their eternal vigil, training new recruits, preparing for the next outbreak of abyss, keeping the darkness at bay through constant warfare. They were the Age of Fire's immune system, attacking any infection before it could spread. But the abyss is insidious. It doesn't just corrupt from outside, it seeps into cracks, finds weaknesses, turns strength into weakness. The Abyss Watchers, in their single-minded dedication to hunting darkness, eventually became corrupted by the very thing they sought to destroy. The abyss took root within their shared soul, turning some of them against the others. When we find them in Dark Souls 3, they're in constant combat with each other. One Watcher rises, empowered by the abyss, eyes glowing red. The others attack him, trying to cut out the corruption. But they're all the same entity, all sharing the same soul. They're fighting themselves over and over, unable to stop because stopping would mean letting the abyss win, but fighting only spreads the corruption further. They link the flame together as a legion, their combined strength enough to kindle it. But now they're too busy fighting each other to even remember their duty. The Ashen One must put them down, ending their tragic cycle of self-destruction, and return their shared cinders to the throne. Then there's Yhorm the Giant. His story is perhaps the saddest of all the Lords of Cinder, a tale of good intentions leading to terrible betrayal. Yhorm was the ruler of the profaned capital, a king who genuinely loved his people, despite the fear many felt toward him because of his enormous size. Giants had been persecuted, hunted, used as slaves. Yhorm's very position as king was revolutionary, proof that giants could be more than monsters. When the profaned flame appeared and threatened to consume his capital, Yhorm made a choice. He would link the first flame, sacrificing himself to gain the power to protect his people from the profaned flame's corruption. He believed his sacrifice would save them, that becoming a Lord of Cinder would give him the strength to shield the profaned capital from disaster. Before he left, Yhorm made a promise to his friend Sigurd of Katarina. He gave Sigurd a storm ruler, a special greatsword designed specifically to kill giants, designed specifically to kill Yhorm himself. He made Sigurd promise that if Yhorm ever lost his way, if he went mad or hollow or became a danger to others, Sigurd would use the Storm Ruler to end him. Yhorm linked the flame. He became a Lord of Cinder, and when he awakened from death, he discovered that his sacrifice had been meaningless. The profaned capital had been destroyed anyway. The profaned flame had consumed his people. The very thing he gave everything to prevent had happened despite his sacrifice. His kingdom was ruins, his people were dead, and he'd been raised from his grave to be told to do it all again. The cutscene that plays when the bells awaken him is heartbreaking. Yhorm rises from his coffin and lets out a roar of pure anguish, a sound of grief and rage and despair. He realizes immediately what's happened, understands that he's been called to sacrifice himself again for a world that couldn't even be bothered to preserve what he died to protect the first time, so Yhorm returns to his throne room in the profaned capital. Not to his throne at Firelink Shrine, but to his own capital's throne room, surrounded by the ashes of his people. He sits there in the ruins, waiting for Sigurd to fulfill his promise, waiting for death to release him from this curse of resurrection, waiting for an end that the cycle keeps denying him. When the Ashen One finally reaches Yhorm, he fights, but not with the fury of someone who wants to win. He fights with the mechanical movements of someone going through motions, someone who's already given up. And if Sigurd is there, fulfilling his old promise, Yhorm almost seems relieved when the Storm Ruler pierces him. Finally, someone kept their word. Finally, the promise was honoured. Finally, he can rest, even if that rest only lasts until his cinders are placed on the throne and the cycle begins again. And finally, we have Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, the most monstrous of all the Lords of Cinder. Unlike the others, Aldrich never intended to link the flame. He never sought to save the world or fulfill some noble purpose. Aldrich was a cleric who developed a taste for human flesh. He ate so many people that his body bloated and softened into a writhing mass of sludge and darkness. Aldrich had visions of an approaching age of the deep sea, a time when the current world would be drowned beneath dark waters. He believed this age was inevitable, that the First Flame's time was ending. But rather than simply waiting for it, Aldrich decided to accelerate it by devouring the gods themselves, consuming their power to hasten the end of the Age of Fire. When Aldrich was discovered, the Cathedral of the Deep imprisoned him, but his strength was so tremendous that they couldn't execute him, so they decided to use him. They made him a Lord of Cinder, forcing him to link the flame not as a reward for heroism, but as a method of control. If he was going to be so powerful, he would serve the flame whether he wanted to or not. Aldrich linked the fire, became a Lord of Cinder, and then was returned to his cathedral prison. The Deep, a cult that worshipped him, grew in power. Archdeacon MacDonnell and the other leaders of the cathedral became corrupted by Aldrich's vision, turning the Cathedral of the Deep into a temple dedicated to his dark prophecies. When the bells tolled and Aldrich was raised from his grave, he immediately resumed his mission. With the help of Pontiff Sulyvahn, who had his own schemes, Aldrich marched on Irithil of the Boreal Valley and captured Anor Londo. There, in the abandoned city of the gods, Aldrich found Gwyndolin, the last of Gwyn's children who had remained in Anor Londo all these ages. Gwyndolin, keeper of Gwyn's legacy, maintainer of the illusions that kept humanity believing in the gods, was imprisoned by Sulyvahn and fed to Aldrich. the monstrous Lord of Cinder slowly devoured the dark sun god, consuming him over what must have been an agonizing period of time. When we face Aldrich as a boss, he's using Gwyndolin's partially eaten corpse as a puppet, wearing the god's body while his slug-like true form writhes underneath. This is the champion the flame chose, not through virtue, not through heroism, but through raw strength. Aldrich was forced to become a Lord of Cinder simply because he was powerful enough to fuel the flame, regardless of whether he believed in its mission or deserved the title. And now he uses that power to devour gods and work toward ending the very age his sacrifice was supposed to preserve. These are the Lords of Cinder, a fearful pygmy who believes the flame must continue, a legion of warriors destroyed by the corruption they swore to fight, a giant king betrayed by the fate he sacrificed everything to prevent, and a monster who became a lord not through merit but through undeniable, terrible power. Each of them link the flame once. Each of them, save Ludleth, refuses to do it again. The Ashen One must. Defeat them all, must forcibly seat their cinders upon the thrones, must complete the ritual, even though everyone involved knows the cycle is broken beyond repair. This is the mission of Dark Souls 3, to force a dying age to take one more breath, even though that breath might be its last. Chapter 5. Pontiff Sulyvahn, the Hidden Tyrant. While the Lords of Cinder are the obvious targets of the Ashen One's quest, there's another figure working in the shadows whose influence touches nearly every tragedy in Lothric. Pontiff Sulyvahn is not a Lord of Cinder. He's not even undead, but his schemes and manipulations have shaped the crisis facing the world more than any single individual save perhaps Gwyn himself. Sulyvahn was born in the painted world of Ariandel, a realm separate from the main world, accessible only through a scrap of canvas. The painted world was meant to be a refuge, a gentle place for those who had nowhere else to go. But Sulyvahn, even as a child, had little use for his frigid homeland. The description of his sorcery tells us he had little use for his frigid homeland since he had not yet experienced loss. This suggests a fundamental coldness in Sulyvahn's nature, an inability to connect with the compassion that was supposed to define the painted world. As a young sorcerer, Sulyvahn left the painted world and wandered until he discovered the profaned capital and the profaned flame that burned within it. This flame was different from the first flame. It was a flame that never went out, an unfading fire born from some ancient sin. When Sulyvahn gazed into the profaned flame, something changed within him. A burning ambition took root, a hunger for power that would drive all his future actions. Sulyvahn travelled to Ariandel of the Boreal Valley, an ancient city built on the slopes below Anor Londo. Ariandel had once been glorious, a city of moon-worshipping sorcerers who lived in harmony with Gwendolyn and the old gods. But by the time Sulyvahn arrived, it was already fading, its population dwindling, its connection to Anor Londo growing tenuous. Sulyvahn ingratiated himself with Gwendolyn and the faithful of Ariandel. He joined the Dark Moon Blades, a covenant dedicated to protecting Gwendolyn and punishing sinners. He rose, through the ranks, becoming trusted, becoming indispensable, and all the while he was planning his betrayal. At some point Gwendolyn fell ill or was weakened through Sulyvahn's machinations. The exact method is unclear, but the result was that Gwendolyn could no longer defend himself. Sulyvahn seized power, imprisoned Gwendolyn in the cathedral of Anor Londo, and proclaimed himself pontiff, a self-styled pope of a church he had corrupted to serve his own ends. Sulyvahn's reach extended far beyond Ariandel. he created the Outrider Knights, warriors who wore special rings that slowly transformed them into beasts. These rings granted tremendous power, but at the cost of the wearer's sanity and humanity. Sulyvahn sent his Outrider Knights to distant lands with instructions to sow chaos and prevent anyone from interfering with his plans. Vort of the Boreal Valley, once a proud knight, was turned into a bestial creature guarding the high wall of Lothric. The Dancer of the Boreal Valley, graceful and deadly, was placed as a guardian in Lothric Castle itself. These were Sulyvahn's agents, his insurance policy ensuring that even if someone tried to reach the Lords of Cinder or interfere with the cycle, they would have to fight through his transformed knights first. It strongly implied that Sulyvahn also had influence in Lothric Castle itself. The Grand Archives contain his sorceries. Statues that resemble him can be found in prominent locations. Some scholars believe Sulyvahn was one of the teachers or advisors who convinced Prince Lothric to refuse his duty, that the prince's decision was not entirely his own, but was influenced by Sulyvahn's persuasion. When Aldrich was raised from his grave and began his march toward Anor Londo, Sulyvahn didn't oppose him. Instead, he facilitated Aldrich's arrival, personally imprisoning Gwyndolin and offering the Dark Sun God to the Devourer. Whether this was alliance or simply Sulyvahn recognizing he couldn't stop Aldrich and choosing to profit from the inevitable is unclear, but the result was the same. Gwyndolin was consumed, and Aldrich gained access to the power of Gwyn's lineage. Sulyvahn's own power is formidable. He wields two great swords simultaneously. The profaned ultra-great sword in his right hand burns with the unfading flame he discovered in the profaned capital. The great sword of judgment in his left hand glows with sorcery and represents his false loyalty to the Dark Moon blades. When the Ashen One faces him, Sulyvahn fights with inhuman speed and ferocity, and midway through the battle, he summons a phantom version of himself that mirrors his every move. But Sulyvahn's true danger isn't his personal combat ability. It's the web of manipulation he's woven across the entire region. Nearly every obstacle the Ashen One faces can be traced back to Sulyvahn in some way. The Outrider Knights blocking key passages, the corruption of the Cathedral of the Deep into a temple for Aldrich's dark vision, the fall of Anor Londo and the consumption of Gwyndolin. Even Lothric's refusal to link the flame may have roots in Sulyvahn's council. Sulyvahn represents something different from the other antagonists in Dark Souls 3. He's not a victim of the cycle. He's not tragic or sympathetic. He's simply ambitious and cruel, a man who saw the dying age as an opportunity for personal power, rather than as a crisis to be solved or accepted. While everyone else was focused on whether the flame should be linked or allowed to die, Sulyvahn was building his own kingdom in the ruins, seizing control while the gods and lords of Cinder were distracted by their grand destinies. When the Ashen One finally defeats Sulyvahn in his cathedral in Erethil, it's one of the few unambiguous victories in the game. There's no tragedy here, no sense of putting down a suffering creature who deserves mercy. Sulyvahn was a tyrant, and his death is simply the removal of a cancer that had infected Lothric and Anor Londo. The world is better without him, even if that world is still dying. But even Sulyvahn's defeat doesn't fix the fundamental problem. His schemes may have accelerated the crisis, may have made linking the flame more difficult, but he didn't create the cycle or the curse or the fading flame. Those problems remain, waiting for the Ashen One at the very end of their journey. Chapter 6. The Twin Princes. At the very top of Lothric Castle, past the dragons and knights and monsters, Past the grand archives where scholars studied the nature of souls and fire, there is a chamber where two princes wait. Prince Lothric and Prince Lorien, the twin princes, though they're not actually twins in the traditional sense. Lorien is the elder brother, once the kingdom's greatest warrior. Lothric is younger, frail, the one born to link the flame. Lorien's story is one of heroism turned to tragedy. In his prime, he was legendary. He fought as a one-man vanguard, leading Lothric's armies into battle after battle. His greatest triumph was defeating the Demon Prince, one of the last remnants of the chaos demons that had plagued the world since the Witch of Izalith's failed attempt to recreate the first flame. The battle with the Demon Prince was Lorien's defining moment. He slew the demon, but the victory came at a terrible price. The demon's flames scorched Lorien's greatsword, leaving it permanently wreathed in fire. The demon's curse crippled Lorien's legs, leaving him unable to walk, and something about that battle, whether from the demon's curse or from the sheer trauma of the fight, left Lorien mute, unable to speak. A lesser man might have become bitter, might have raged against fate for robbing him of his strength. But Lorien did something that defined his true character. When he learned that his younger brother had been born cursed with eternal frailty, that Lothric would never have the strength to stand on his own, Lorien made a choice. He took on Lothric's curse as well, adding his brother's suffering to his own. This wasn't metaphorical. Lorien used some form of magic or soul bond to literally share Lothric's curse, reducing his own strength even further, but ensuring his brother wouldn't have to face his affliction alone. The two became inseparable, Lorien carrying Lothric on his back, Lothric guiding his brother and supporting him, with magic. This brotherly devotion is beautiful, but it also doomed Lothric. The entire kingdom had been built around the prophecy that Lothric would link the flame. Generations of careful bloodline management, of studying and preparation and planning, all culminating in this one prince who was supposed to save the world. But Lothric had his brother's love and loyalty, had someone who accepted him despite his frailty, and that changed everything. Lothric was educated by the finest scholars in the kingdom. The Grand Archives, the repository of all of Lothric's accumulated knowledge, was at his disposal. His teachers included some of the greatest minds of the age, possibly even Pontiff Sulyvahn himself. And these teachers, whether intentionally or not, introduced doubt into Lothric's mind. They taught him about the nature of the first flame, about how it had been linked again and again, each time buying less time, each sacrifice burning faster. They showed him the ruins of kingdoms that had risen and fallen between linkings. They explained that the curse of the undead was born from Gwyn's first linking, that all the suffering and hollowing and death could be traced back to one god's refusal to let the Age of Fire end naturally. And Lothric began to question. Was his sacrifice truly necessary? Would linking the flame actually save anyone? Or would it just postpone the inevitable for another age? The world was already dying. The kingdoms were already ruins. The gods were already gone or fled. What exactly would he be saving? More importantly, Lothric had Lorien. He had someone who loved him, who had given up everything to ease his suffering. If Lothric linked the flame, he would burn. His soul would become fuel. And Lorien, connected to him through their shared curse, might burn as well. Was saving a dying world worth losing his brother? Prince Lothric made his choice. When the time came to link the flame, when all his preparation reached its culmination, he simply refused. He and Lorien retreated to the highest chamber in Lothric Castle and made it clear they would not be moved. The kingdom fell into chaos around them, but the twin princes remained in their tower, waiting for the flame to die. This refusal is what triggered the entire crisis. If Lothric had linked the flame as planned, the cycle would have continued. The Age of Fire would have endured for another span, but his refusal meant the bells had to toll. The Lords of Cinder had to be raised. The desperate measures had to be taken. When the Ashen One finally reaches the twin princes, they're waiting. Lothric is draped across Lorien's back, so frail he can barely lift his head. Lorien grips his flaming greatsword with both hands, ready to defend his younger brother to the death. The princes know why the Ashen One has come. They know they must be defeated, their cinders taken, but they will not go willingly. The battle with the twin princes is one of the most mechanically complex fights in Dark Souls 3. Lorien teleports around the arena, his sword wreathed in flame, covering ground despite his crippled legs through sheer force of will and magic. Lothric supports him with spells, healing him, augmenting his attacks. They fight as one unit, each compensating for the other's weaknesses. When Lorien falls, Lothric revives him. The younger prince cannot fight alone, cannot even stand alone, but he refuses to let his brother die. Only when both princes are defeated in quick succession can the battle finally end. And when it does, when their bodies fade and only their cinders remain, there's something profoundly sad about it. The twin princes weren't evil. They weren't serving some dark god or trying to destroy the world. They were just two brothers who loved each other, who refused to be separated, who decided that their bond was more important than a cycle neither of them believed in anymore. Their refusal to link the flame wasn't cowardice. It was a choice based on love and doubt, and the very reasonable question of whether the Age of Fire was worth another sacrifice. But the cycle doesn't care about love or doubt or reasonable questions. It needs fuel. And so, the Ashen One takes the twin princes' cinders and places them on a throne at Firelink Shrine, forcibly conscripting them into service even in death. This is the nature of the cycle. It grinds on regardless of choice or consent or whether anyone still believes in it. With the twin princes defeated, only one throne remains empty. But before the path to that throne can open, there's one more secret to uncover, one more god to face, hidden away in a place beyond time. Chapter 7: The Nameless King. Hidden in a realm accessible only through meditation and a specific gesture found in a specific location lies Archdragon Peak, a place of constant storm and perpetual twilight. Here, the faithful of the Dragon Covenant gather, attempting to transcend their humanity and become dragons themselves. And at the very peak, summoned by ringing a great bell, comes one of the most legendary figures in all of Dark Souls, the Nameless King. To understand the Nameless King, we must go back to the Age of Fire's very beginning. Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, had a firstborn son. This son was a god of war, a warrior of tremendous prowess who fought alongside his father in the war against the everlasting dragons. He wielded lightning like Gwyn, creating great spears of sunlight that could pierce dragon scales. He was said to be inferior to none in military might. This firstborn founded the Warriors of Sunlight, a covenant of knights dedicated to cooperation and mutual aid. He was so revered that statues were erected in his honour, his symbol displayed proudly in temples and churches. He trained warriors, including Ornstein, who became his first knight and eventually one of Gwyn's 4 knights. But something happened. The exact details are lost to history, deliberately erased. Gwyn's firstborn committed some act of foolishness that led to his exile from Anor Londo. His deific status was revoked. His name was struck from every record, chiselled off every monument, removed from every text. He became the nameless king, forbidden even the dignity of being remembered. The crime that earned this punishment was betrayal. At some point, whether during the war with the dragons or after, Gwyn's firstborn chose to side with the everlasting dragons, the very creatures he had fought to exterminate. The enemies of the Age of Fire became his allies. He sacrificed everything to ally himself with the ancient dragons, abandoning his father, his home, his very identity, to join the monsters he had once hunted. Why would he do this? The game offers no clear answer, but we can speculate. Perhaps he came to see the war against the dragons as unjust, a genocide against immortal beings who had harmed no one. Perhaps he realised that Gwyn's Age of Fire was built on tyranny, that his father had usurped the natural order for the benefit of the gods at humanity's expense. Or perhaps he simply found more honour among the dragons than among the scheming, fading gods of Anor Londo. Whatever his reason, the betrayal was absolute. Gwyn could not tolerate his own son siding with the enemy. The firstborn was cast out, his name forbidden, his very existence scrubbed from history. Even centuries later, even after Gwyn himself had burned in the kiln of the First Flame, the prohibition remained. References to the firstborn were cryptic at best, his identity a mystery that scholars debated endlessly. But the nameless king did not simply disappear. He allied with the dragons, yes, but not the everlasting dragons of old, who were all dead or in hiding. Instead, he befriended a new kind of dragon, the storm drakes, descendants of the ancient dragons who had evolved to survive in a post-dragon age. He tamed one of these creatures, the King of the Storm, and fought alongside it in countless battles. The nameless king and his storm drake became legendary in their own right, though few knew the rider's true identity. They fought for causes that aligned with the dragon's interests, opposed the gods when necessary, and created a sanctuary at Archdragon Peak where those who wished to follow the dragons could gather. When the Ashen One rings the great bell at Archdragon Peak, they summon the Nameless King. What follows is one of the most challenging boss fights in any Souls game. The first phase pits the player against the King of the Storm, a massive dragon that the Nameless King rides. The dragon breathes fire, summons lightning, and attacks with both grace and fury. All the while, the Nameless King guides his mount, striking with a lightning-empowered sword spear. When the King of the Storm falls, something heartbreaking happens. The Nameless King dismounts and absorbs his companion's soul, taking its power into himself. This was the custom in the Age of the Gods, we're told. But there's clear sorrow in the action. This wasn't just a mount or a tool. This was a companion that had fought beside him through countless battles. And now, to face the Ashen One alone, the Nameless King must consume his friend's essence. The second phase of the battle is brutal. The Nameless King wields his sword spear with devastating skill, mixing melee attacks with lightning miracles, moving with the grace of a god of war who has never lost his edge. His attacks are precisely timed to catch players who dodge too early or too late. His reach is incredible, and his damage output is among the highest of any boss in the game. But what makes the Nameless King truly special isn't just the difficulty, it's what he represents. He's proof that the gods of the Age of Fire weren't all noble, or all working toward the same goal. Gwyn's own son saw enough in the Age of Fire to make him betray everything and everyone he knew. The firstborn of the Lord of Sunlight chose darkness and dragons over his father's vision. When the nameless king is defeated, the sky clears. The perpetual storm that had raged over Archdragon Peak dissipates. The Ashen One receives the soul of this ancient god and can transpose it into weapons or miracles that carry the nameless king's power. And in the arena where the battle took place, Ornstein's armour can be found. This discovery raises more questions than it answers. Ornstein, the loyal first knight of the Firstborn, who later became one of Gwyn's 4 knights, eventually left Anor Londo. According to some accounts, he went searching for the Nameless King, his original master. Did he find him? Did they reconcile? Did they fight? The armour suggests Ornstein reached Archdragon Peak, but whether he died there, left his armour willingly, or something else happened is unknown. The Nameless King's defeat, like so many victories in Dark Souls 3, feels hollow. Yes, the player has overcome one of the game's greatest challenges. Yes, they've claimed the soul of a legendary god, but they've also killed one of the few beings who had the strength to oppose Gwyn's vision and survive. They've eliminated one of the last remnants of the Age of Gods. And for what? So the cycle can continue? So the flame can be linked one more time? With the Nameless King defeated, the Ashen One's journey through the main game approaches its conclusion. But before facing the final challenge, they must make a choice. Several choices, in fact, each leading to a different ending, a different fate for the First Flame and the world it sustains. Chapter 8. The 4 Endings. Dark Souls 3 offers 4 possible endings, each representing a different answer to the fundamental question the game poses. Should the Age of Fire continue, and if not, what should replace it? The first and most straightforward ending is to link the First Flame. This is what the Ashen One was resurrected to do, what the entire quest has been building toward. After defeating the soul of Cinder, the guardian of the First Flame, the player can simply touch the bonfire and link the flame themselves. In this ending, the Ashen One kneels before the First Flame and is consumed by it. Their body ignites, burning from within as their soul becomes fuel for one more age. But unlike Gwyn's original linking, unlike the great conflagrations of previous ages, this linking is pathetic. The Ashen One barely catches fire. The flame flickers weakly as it consumes them. The game makes it clear that this sacrifice, like all the others, is ultimately futile. The flame is dying, and nothing can truly save it. The Ashen One has brought another age, but it will be brief, weak, a pale shadow of what the Age of Fire once was. This ending is presented as the normal conclusion, what you get by default if you don't go out of your way to unlock alternatives. But it's also clearly portrayed as a bad ending, or at least a tragic one. The Ashen One has perpetuated a cycle that should have ended long ago, sacrificed themselves for a world that's already dead in all but name. They've chosen to let the flame continue not because it's the right choice, but because it's the expected one, the path of least resistance. The second ending, the End of Fire, requires more effort to unlock. The Ashen One must first venture into the untended graves, a dark mirror of the cemetery of ash where they first awoke. There they must defeat Champion Gundyr, a harder version of the tutorial boss, and find the eyes of a Fire Keeper, a special item hidden in the dark version of Firelink Shrine. These eyes, when given to the Firekeeper who tends the bonfire at Firelink Shrine, grant her the ability to see a world without fire. She describes a vision of darkness, but not the terrifying abyss that the gods feared. Instead, she sees tiny flames dancing in the darkness, suggesting that even in an age of dark, fire would not disappear completely. New flames would light eventually, different from the first flame, belonging to a different age. If the Ashen One gives the Fire Keeper these eyes, and then defeats the Soul of Cinder, they can summon her to the kiln of the first flame. The Fire Keeper will then draw the last embers from the dying flame into herself, extinguishing it completely. The world fades to darkness, and the Age of Fire ends. But the Fire Keeper promises that this isn't the end of everything. The first flame quickly fades. Darkness will shortly settle. But one day, tiny flames will dance across the darkness, like embers linked by lords past. This ending is presented as bittersweet. The Age of Fire is over, the cycle is broken, but life will continue in some form. The darkness is not oblivion but transformation, the world changing into something new. Whether this is truly better than linking the flame, or just trading one uncertain future for another, is left for the player to decide. There's a secret variation of this ending. After the Firekeeper draws the last embers from the flame, the player has a few seconds before the screen fades to black. During this window they can attack and kill the Firekeeper, stealing the flame for themselves. If they do this, the ending changes. The Ashen One takes the last spark of the first flame and keeps it, standing alone in the darkness with that tiny light cupped in their hands. The Firekeeper's reassuring words never come. There's just the Ashen One, alone with the flame they stole in a world now completely dark. This Unkindled ending is perhaps the most nihilistic. The Ashen One has ended the Age of Fire, yes, but they've done it through betrayal and murder. They've taken the flame not to let the world change, but to possess it themselves, hoarding the last light out of fear or greed or simple selfishness. It's a fitting punishment for this treachery that the game doesn't even grant an achievement for it. The third major ending, and arguably the most complex, is the Usurpation of Fire, also known as the Lord of Hollows ending. This ending requires completing a lengthy and specific quest line involving Yhorm of Londor, Uria of Londor, and Anri of Astora. The process begins when the Ashen One recruits Yhorm of Londor, a pilgrim found dying on a bridge in the undead settlement. Yhorm offers to draw out your true strength, granting 3 levels in exchange for the Ashen One accepting dark sigils, the mark of the Hollowing Curse. Each level up adds another dark sigil, and each dark sigil increases the Ashen One's hollowing stat. After Yhorm grants 5 levels and 5 dark sigils, he dies or is killed by his comrade, and Uria of Londor appears in Firelink Shrine. Uria represents the Sable Church of Londor, a group that has been planning for generations to usurp the First Flame. She guides the Ashen One through a series of steps, including finding Anri of Astora and ensuring their quest line progresses in a specific way. The culmination of this quest line is a dark wedding ceremony in Anor Londo. Anri, who's been seeking to link the flame themselves, is instead betrayed. A pilgrim serving Uria performs a ritual of wedlock, and the Ashen One symbolically marries Anri by plunging a sword into their face. This grants the Ashen One Anri's dark sigils in addition to their own, marking them as the Lord of Hollows. When the Ashen One then defeats the Soul of Cinder and touches the First Flame, something unprecedented happens. Instead of linking the flame or letting it die, they usurp it. The flame is drawn into the Ashen One's body, into the dark sigils they carry. The sky darkens, but the flame doesn't go out. Instead, it becomes part of the Ashen One themselves. The cutscene shows the Ashen One walking from the kiln as Uria and other Hollows kneel before them. The Ashen One has become the Lord of Hollows, a new kind of god who holds the first flame within themselves rather than sacrificing themselves to it. The sun in the sky becomes a dark eclipse that follows the Ashen One's movement, suggesting they now control the flame rather than serving it. This ending is heavily tied to the lore of Kerte, one of the primordial serpents who had argued since the first Dark Souls that humanity should inherit the world. Kerte had tried to bring about an Age of Dark in previous games, but learned that simply letting the flame die wasn't enough. The flame would always light again eventually. Instead, the flame needed to be usurped, controlled, made to serve humanity rather than commanding humanity to serve it. Whether this ending is truly good is debatable. The Ashen One has broken the cycle, yes, but at what cost? They've murdered Henri in a dark ritual, embraced the hollowing curse, and potentially enslaved the first flame to their will. They've become a new kind of tyrant, trading one form of domination for another. The Hollows may cheer their new lord, but are they truly free, or have they simply found a new master? Each of these endings offers a different vision of the world's future. Link the flame and perpetuate a dying cycle. Let it die and hope something better emerges from the darkness. Betray the Firekeeper and hoard the last light for yourself, or usurp the flame and become a new kind of god. None of these choices are presented as unambiguously correct. Each has consequences. Each is a gamble on an uncertain future. The game refuses to judge the player's choice. Whichever ending you select, the world fades to black, the credits roll, and you're left to ponder whether you made the right decision. This ambiguity is intentional, a reflection of Dark Souls' refusal to provide easy answers to its hardest questions. But the main game is not the end of the story. There are 2 DLC expansions that add crucial context and ultimately provide what many consider the true final chapter of the Dark Souls trilogy. Chapter 9, The Painted World of Ariandel. The first DLC, Ashes of Ariandel, brings us to a place we've visited before in Dark Souls 1, though much has changed. The Painted World is a realm created on canvas, a place separate from the normal world where outcasts and those with nowhere else to go can find refuge. It's meant to be a cold, dark and gentle place, a sanctuary from the harshness of reality. But when the Ashen One enters this painted world, they find it rotting. The same scarlet rot that plagued Malenia in Elden Ring, the same corruption that has appeared throughout Souls games, has infected the painting. The beautiful snowy landscape is marred by festering decay. The inhabitants are suffering, and the painting itself is dying. The painted world is ruled by 2 figures, Father Ariandel and Sister Frida. Ariandel is the restorer of the painting, though what exactly this means is unclear. He's a massive, hunched figure who sits in his chapel, flagellating himself, endlessly, spilling his blood to maintain the painting. His suffering is voluntary, a sacrifice he believes necessary to preserve the world. Sister Frida is his companion, an Ashen One like the player, someone who once sought to link the first flame but ultimately fled to the painted world instead. She's elegant, deadly, wielding a scythe with supernatural skill. She claims to protect the painting, to preserve it as it is, but her protection is actually stagnation. She refuses to let the painting burn even though burning is necessary for its renewal. The painted world operates on a cycle similar to the first flame. As a painting ages, it rots and decays. When the rot becomes too much, the painting must be burned away completely, and a new painting must be created to replace it. This is the natural cycle, the way the painted world renews itself. But Frida has decided this cycle must be stopped. She believes burning the painting would destroy the gentle refuge it provides, so she's keeping it alive through Ariandel's suffering, forcing the painting to persist in a state of slow decay rather than allowing it to die and be reborn. The Ashen One is brought to the painted world by a mysterious figure, Slave Knight Gael. He's an old warrior wearing a red hood, his armour rusted and his weapons worn from countless battles. Gael introduces the player to a young woman called the Painter, a girl who waits in her attic workshop for someone to show her flame. She wants to paint a new world, a better world, but she needs 3 things: fire to burn the old painting, the dark soul of man as pigment for the new one, and someone brave enough to help her. Gael himself cannot be that someone. He knows he's not strong enough, that he's no champion. So he recruits the Ashen One, asking them to show the painter flame so she can witness what she needs to paint. The Ashen One ventures into the painted world, confronts Ariandel and Frida, and ignites the flame that will burn the painting away. The boss fight with Father Ariandel and Sister Frida is one of the longest and most grueling in the game. It has 3 phases, each introducing new mechanics and challenges. In the first phase, you fight Frida alone. She's fast, deadly, can turn invisible, and uses both her scythe and dark magic. When defeated, she seems to die, and the fight appears over. But then Father Ariandel rises from his chair, his bowl of blood crashing to the ground. He revives Frida, healing her completely, and the second phase begins. Now you fight both of them together. Ariandel is slow but devastating, smashing with his massive bowl, sending waves of flame across the arena. Frida supports him, making the already difficult fight exponentially harder. When both are finally defeated, the fight still isn't over. Frida's body ignites with black flame. She rises one final time, now transformed into Black Flame Frida, empowered by the dark fire within her. This third phase is the hardest, Frida moving faster than ever, her attacks now leaving trails of black flame, her damage output capable of killing the player in just a few hits. When Frida is finally truly defeated, the chapel burns. The painted world begins its cycle of renewal. The painter thanks the Ashen One for showing her flame and promises to create a new painting, one that will be a cold, dark and gentle place, like the original was meant to be. But she still needs pigment. She needs the dark soul of man, and for that Gael will have to embark on his own journey. Ashes of Ariandel adds important context to the themes of Dark Souls 3. It shows another cycle, another world trapped between necessary change and the desire to preserve what is. Frida, like Gwyn, like all those who refuse to let the old age end, tries to prevent the natural death and rebirth of her world. And like Gwyn's efforts, her attempt only leads to more suffering, more decay, more corruption spreading through a world that should have been allowed to die. The DLC also introduces us to Gael and the Painter, characters who will become crucial in the second DLC, and what many consider the true ending of the entire Dark Souls series. Chapter 10, The Ringed City. The second DLC, The Ringed City, takes place at the literal end of the world. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but actually at the point where time and space collapse into a single moment, where all the ages of the world pile up on each other in a heap of ash and ruins. The Ashen One enters this final realm through the Dreg Heap. a place where different eras are stacked on top of each other. Ruins from Lothric Castle sit atop buildings from Earthen Peak, which itself rests on remnants of even older civilizations. Time has broken down completely here. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously. Causality has become meaningless. As the Ashen One descends through this heap of history, they find messages written in glowing letters. "Take the plunge," the messages say. "Show some faith." These are messages from Gael, guiding the player to the very bottom of the Dreg Heap and beyond, to the Ringed City itself. The Ringed City is ancient beyond measure. It was created by Gwyn at the very dawn of the Age of Fire, built to contain and isolate the Pygmies, the descendants of the furtive Pygmy who found the Dark Soul. Gwyn feared the Dark Soul and humanity's potential power, so he built the Ringed City as both prison and sanctuary, a place where humanity's darkness could be contained away from his Age of Fire. To seal the bargain, Gwyn sent his youngest daughter, Filianora, to live with the Pygmies. She was given a mysterious egg to hold, and her slumber was said to maintain the seal on the Ringed City, keeping it separate from the rest of the world. The Ringed Knights guarded her, powerful warriors sworn to protect this princess who slept through the ages. The Ashen One fights through the Ringed City, encountering strange enemies and stranger allies. They face Half-Light, Spear of the Church, a boss fight that can summon another player to defend the church. They battle Dark Eater Medea, a massive dragon who has been consuming the abyss for so long that it's begun to corrupt him from within. Medea's fight is optional, but considered one of the hardest in the entire series, a remnant of the ancient dragons now twisted by the very darkness he was created to oppose. Eventually the Ashen One reaches the Church of Filianor, where the princess has slept for uncountable ages. She still holds the egg Gwyn gave her, though it's cracked now, its purpose perhaps already failed or fulfilled. When the Ashen One touches the egg, everything changes. The egg shatters completely. Filianora awakens, and then, in an instant that feels like falling through time itself, everything shifts. The Ashen One finds themselves in a vast desert of ash, the sky dark, the sun a distant dying ember. This is the true end of the world, the point, where the first flame has finally completely died. The Age of Fire is over. What remains is a wasteland where nothing lives and nothing grows. In the distance, standing among the remains of the Ringed City's royal chamber, is a lone figure. As the Ashen One approaches, they see Pygmy lords, the rulers of the Ringed City, or what's left of them. Their husks, dried and empty, their blood long ago turned to dust, and standing over them, covered in blood, is Slave Knight Gael. Gael has completed his journey. He's travelled through time and space, fought through impossible battles, survived to the absolute end of the world itself, and he's found what he came for, the Pygmy lords and the dark soul that flows through their veins. But there's a problem. The blood has dried. After all these ages, after all this time, the blood that should carry the dark soul of man has evaporated, become useless as pigment. Driven by desperation and madness, Gael has been consuming the Pygmy lords, cutting their throats and drinking their dried blood, trying to accumulate the fragments of the dark soul within his own body. But the dark soul is too powerful. It's corrupting him, transforming him into something monstrous. His body has grown massive, his chest torn open by a gaping wound that resembles the dark sign. His mind is almost gone, consumed by the dark soul's power. When Gael sees the Ashen One, he recognizes them as another person with a fragment of the dark soul. In his madness, he demands that fragment, attacking in a rage. What follows is widely considered the best boss fight in the entire Dark Souls trilogy. The battle with Slave Knight Gael takes place across the entire Ashen Wasteland. The arena is enormous, the largest in the series, giving both combatants room to maneuver. Gael fights with his executioner's greatsword, now broken and chipped from centuries of use, and a customized repeating crossbow that fires a barrage of bolts. The first phase sees Gael fighting mostly, like a beast, loping on all fours, slashing with wild, unpredictable attacks. His cape flows and strikes like an independent weapon, adding extra hits to combos. His crossbow provides long-range harassment. Despite his bestial stance, every movement shows the skill of a warrior who has fought for lifetimes. When brought to 2/3 health, a cutscene plays. Gael straightens up, standing on 2 legs, his posture becoming more human, more dignified. The cape on his back ignites with dark flame, and the battle enters its second phase. Now his attacks are augmented with red, fiery explosions. He begins using the Way of White Corona, a miracle that sends halos of light spinning through the air. His combos become longer, more complex, more punishing. At 1/3 health, the final phase begins. The sky itself turns dark, and red lightning begins falling randomly across the arena, called down by this Dark Souls power within Gael. These bolts add an element of chaos to the fight, forcing constant movement, punishing any attempt to play too safely. Gael's attacks reach their peak ferocity, his dark flame spreading further, his combos covering more ground, his raw damage output rivaling any boss in Souls history. What makes the fight special isn't just the mechanical excellence, though that's certainly present. It's the emotional weight. Gael is not a villain. He's not evil or cruel. He's a tragic figure who gave everything for a cause he believed in. He wanted to help the painter create a better world, a gentle place for those who had nowhere else to go. He knew undertaking this quest would likely destroy him, that he lacked the strength of a true champion, that he had little hope of safe return. And he did it anyway. The Ashen One's fight with Gael isn't heroic. It's a mercy killing, putting down a man who's been corrupted beyond saving in pursuit of a noble goal. When Gael finally falls, when his massive body collapses to the ash and his soul fades, there's no triumph, only sadness. This is the end of the Dark Souls series. 2 warriors fighting in the wasteland at the end of time, one mad from corruption, the other duty-bound to take what the mad one carries. When the battle ends, the Ashen One claims Gael's blood. Within that blood flows the concentrated dark soul of man, the pigment the painter needs. With this, the Ashen One can return to the painted world and give the painter what she requires to create her new world. The painter thanks the Ashen One and promises to create a painting that will be a cold, dark and gentle place. She says she will name it Ash, in honour of those who helped her. This has led to tremendous speculation among fans. Some believe the painting will become the world of Bloodborne. Others think it might be demon souls. Some imagine it's a completely new world, one we'll never see, existing beyond the scope of the games. But what matters is the symbolism. In a world where the first flame has finally died, where the Age of Fire has reached its absolute end, where nothing remains but ash and ruins, there's still hope. Not hope that the old world can be saved or that the Age of Fire can be rekindled. That time is past. But hope that something new can be created, that from the ashes of the old world, a new one can be born. The Ringed City DLC ends with the Ashen One sitting on a dune in the Ashen Wasteland, watching the horizon. The Dark Souls series, which began with the discovery of the first flame and the disparity it created, ends here, at the point where that flame has finally truly died. The cycle is broken, the age is over. What comes next is unknown, but it will be something entirely new. Chapter 11. Conclusion. And so we come to the end of our journey through Dark Souls 3, through the complete lore of this dying world and its desperate champions. We've travelled from the Age of Ancients through countless cycles of fire and dark, witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, met gods and monsters and everything in between. The story of Dark Souls 3 is ultimately a story about endings, about cycles that have gone on too long, about systems that were built to be eternal but have proven to be anything but, about the difficulty of letting go even when holding on only causes more suffering. Gwyn's decision to link the first flame was born from fear and pride. He feared the Age of Dark and what it would mean for the gods. He was proud of what he'd built and unwilling to let it end. So he created a system where his Age of Fire could be prolonged indefinitely through sacrifice. But every system built on sacrifice eventually runs out of willing victims. Eventually people begin to question whether the sacrifice is worth what it purchases. The Lords of Cinder who refused their duty weren't cowards or villains. They were simply tired. They'd burned themselves once for a world that didn't improve, that only grew more desperate with each linking. When asked to burn themselves again, they said no. And it's hard to blame them. Prince Lothric's refusal is even more understandable. He was born and raised to be kindling, had no choice in his destiny, and chose to assert his will in the only way he could. By refusing to participate in a cycle he didn't believe in. His refusal broke the system, forced it to show its true desperation by raising dead heroes and failed champions. He proved that the Age of Fire could not continue without consent, that it required willing or coerced sacrifice to perpetuate itself. The Ashen One's journey is the final iteration of a cycle that has repeated countless times. Undead rises, defeats challenges, gathers the souls of lords, links the flame. But this time the Ashen One has choices. They can link the flame, yes, but they can also let it die. They can betray those who help them. They can usurp the flame for themselves. The ending is not predetermined, not inevitable, and that makes all the difference. What makes Dark Souls 3's lore so compelling is its refusal to provide easy answers. Is the Age of Fire truly necessary? Would an Age of Dark be better or worse? What does it mean to usurp the flame? What kind of world will the painter create? The game gives you information, shows you the consequences of past choices, but never tells you what the right choice is. Gael's story perhaps captures the essence of Dark Souls 3 better than any other. Here is a man who never aspired to be a hero, who knew he wasn't strong enough to save the world, but who tried anyway because someone he cared about needed help. His journey took him through literal ages, through impossible battles, all the way to the end of time itself, and, in the end, he was corrupted, transformed into the very monster he'd fought so long to prevent. But his sacrifice wasn't meaningless. Because of Gael, because of his persistence through madness and corruption, the painter received her pigment. A new world could be created. Something good came from his suffering. This is Dark Souls in miniature. Tragedy and hope intermixed. Sacrifice that seems futile but ultimately matters. Endings that are also beginnings. The series doesn't promise that things will get better. It doesn't guarantee that sacrifice will be rewarded or that hope is justified, but it shows that even in a dying world, even at the absolute end of everything, there are still people trying to make things better, still warriors fighting for causes they believe in, still artists trying to create something beautiful, still heroes, even if those heroes are broken, failed, unworthy champions who rise one more time because someone has to. The first flame may be dying, but tiny flames still dance in the darkness. The age of fire may be ending, but what comes after is not necessarily oblivion. Kingdoms fall, but people persist. Gods fade, but humanity endures. This is the message buried beneath all the tragedy and loss, that endings are not the same as extinction, that change is not the same as death, that letting go of the old is necessary to make room for the new. If you've enjoyed this journey through the lore of Dark Souls 3, I'd really appreciate if you could hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There are so many more stories to explore, so many more worlds to examine, so many more tales to tell as you drift off to sleep. Until next time, rest well. Let the fire fade or let it burn as you choose. Let the age end or continue as you will. And remember that in a world of fire and dark, of gods and hollows, of impossible choices and tragic heroes, you always have the right to decide for yourself what ending you believe in. Thanks for listening. May the flames guide your way, or may the dark comfort you, whichever you prefer. Sleep well, good night.